Calvin Cortez Broadus Jr., known globally as Snoop Dogg, was born in Long Beach, California on October 20, 1971. He was born to Vernell Varnado and Beverly Tate. His father, Vernell Varnado, who was a Vietnam War veteran, singer, and mail carrier, left Snoop's mother and the family only 3 months after Snoop's birth. Snoop ended up being named after his stepfather, Calvin Cortez Broadus Sr. His father remained largely absent from his life. During his childhood, his mother affectionately bestowed upon him the nickname Snoopy, inspired by his fondness for and resemblance to the iconic cartoon character from Peanuts. He later borrowed parts of a relative's name who used to call himself Tate Doggy Dogg to create the moniker of Snoop Doggy Dogg, which he used early in his career. When he decided to call himself Snoop Doggy Dogg, his cousin, Tate Doggy Dogg, didn't much like it, but Snoop convinced him that he was going to take this name to the stars. Snoop was the second of his mother's 3 sons. His mother and stepfather divorced in 1975. When he was very young, he began singing and playing piano at the Golgotha Trinity Baptist Church. In 6th grade, he began rapping. Snoop Dogg attended elementary school at McKinley Elementary School in Long Beach before moving on to middle school at Monroe Middle School. When he got to junior high school, Snoop Dogg met a kid named Sean who was 1 grade under him, and they began to experiment on rapping. They formed a group and would record at Sean's house because he had some lightweight music recording equipment. Sean would write the songs that Snoop Dogg would perform at school the next day. When he rapped in the hallways at school, he would draw such a big crowd that the school principal would think there was a fight going on. His classmates' positive response was so overwhelming. Snoop began to devote long hours every night after school studying the chops of professional rappers and honing his craft with neighborhood friends. Later on, he transferred from Jordan High School to Long Beach Polytechnic High School, where he played football and participated in other extracurricular activities. One of the most important connections Snoop Dogg made when he was growing up is with fellow rapper Warren G, who is Dr. Dre's stepbrother. The two became best friends and later on became friends with Nate Dogg. Snoop became friends with Nate in 1986 at Long Beach Polytechnic High School. They attended science classroom together, and somehow, their desks were right next to each other in the back of the classroom. They would rap and do beats on the tables during free periods. Warren G was protective of Snoop because they grew up together. This bond would often lead to clashes between Warren G and Nate Dogg in their earlier days. Having been raised in a tough section of eastern Long Beach, Snoop was caught up early on in the crossfire of turf fights between various factions of the notorious Crips gang. The gang situation had been way out of control in the area. Despite his mother's best efforts to keep him singing in the choir and playing football, Snoop fell in with the wrong crowd during his teens and started running the streets and hustling dope. It was believed that he was a member of the Rollin' 20s Crips gang in the East Side neighborhood of Long Beach, although in 1993 he denied the media reports by saying that he never joined a gang. Barely 1 month after he graduated from Long Beach Polytechnic High School, the rapper was incarcerated on a drug charge and for the next 3 years was frequently incarcerated on probation violations. When he was rapping in the county jail, a lot of the older inmates told him that he was too talented to be in prison and needed to be outside than wasting his life away with crime. After his release, Snoop quit dealing drugs and began to concentrate seriously on becoming a professional musician. By that time, he had already been rapping for 7 years, ever since performing a song in front of his 6th grade class called Super Rhymes. He patterned his style after East Coast rappers, his biggest idol being Slick Rick, who also eventually got into trouble with the law over a shooting and was jailed. In a short span of time, Snoop initiated the process of penning and recording his own compositions. He later signed a 90-day record contract with a talent agent from Carson, but backed out of the deal after being pressured to tone down his lyrics. After working with several Long Beach rap partners, Snoop formed a rap and R&B group with Nate Dogg and Warren G called 213. The trio was so popular in Long Beach that they were able to sell more than 500 homemade tapes of Snoop's material to rap fans out of the trunk of a car, one of which eventually, in 1991, found its way into the hands of Dr. Dre, the NWA founder who was trying to launch a solo career. Warren G gave a tape to Dre, who was impressed with Snoop's style. Dr. Dre was impressed by Snoop's solo freestyles over a song, Hold On by American girl group, En Vogue. The producer was so impressed by the sample that he called Snoop to audition for his label Death Row Records, then known as Future Shock. Former NWA affiliate, American rapper Tracy Lynn Curry, better known as the DOC, taught him to structure his lyrics and separate the themes into verses, hooks, and choruses. When Dre decided to make his tentative first stab at a solo career in 1992 with the theme song for the film called Deep Cover, which describes the murder of an undercover cop, he had Snoop rap with him. His deft phrasing and catchy melodic chants also played a prominent role in the success of Dr. Dre's The Chronic album. Snoop rapped on The Chronic as much as Dre, and his drawled vocals were as important to the record's success. Dre's singles Nothing But a G-Tang and Dre Day, which prominently featured Snoop, became top 10 pop crossover hits in the spring of 1993, setting the stage for Snoop's much-anticipated debut album, Doggy Style. Snoop wrote some of the Chronic album's lyrics, raps on the whole album, and was featured soloist on 4 of the tracks. Critics began hailing Snoop as the nation's hottest hip-hop attraction. While he was recording the album with Dre in August 1993, Snoop was arrested in connection with the drive-by shooting death of Philip Woldemariam. Snoop was sitting in the driver's seat of his black 1993 Jeep on August 25 when, witnesses told police, an argument broke out between his pal Sean Abrams and Philip Woldemariam in a park in the Palms area of West Los Angeles, leading to a shooting. That argument, sources say, followed an earlier shouting match that afternoon in front of Snoop's apartment, during which Woldemariam allegedly brandished a weapon and threatened the rapper's life. According to police, Snoop's bodyguard McKinley Lee and Abrams chased Woldemariam to Woodbine Park 3 blocks away, where at 7:20 p.m. Lee shot Woldemariam. The rapper claimed it was self-defense, alleging that the victim was stalking Snoop. Following a performance at the MTV Music Awards in September 1993, Snoop turned himself over to authorities. He was later acquitted on February 20, 1996. Following numerous delays, the Doggy Style album eventually saw its release under Death Row Records in November 1993. The Doggy Style debuted at number 1 and sold more than 5 million copies, and Snoop became the face of Death Row Records, then the most infamous label in the industry. It was helmed by Suge Knight, a muscled mountain of machismo who was the most feared man in the record business, whispered to have bullied other rivals by dangling them upside down off balconies. The album achieved a historic feat by debuting at the top of the charts, making it the first debut album to accomplish such a remarkable entry. The singles Who Am I, What's My Name, and Gin and Juice reached the top 10 most played songs in the United States, and the album stayed on the Billboard charts for several months. In 1994, gangsta rap became the center of arguments about censorship and labeling, with Snoop Dogg often used as an example of violent and misogynistic musicians. During Snoop's England tour in the spring of 1994, English tabloids and some politicians urged the UK government to expel the rapper from the country, citing his arrest. Snoop later capitalized on his impending trial by creating a short movie inspired by the Doggy Style track Murder Was the Case. Accompanying this film was a soundtrack that swiftly rose to the top of the charts in 1994. Simultaneously, Doggy Style had already achieved quadruple platinum status. Throughout the entirety of 1995, Snoop dedicated his efforts to readying himself for the legal case, which ultimately reached the trial phase later in that year. In late 1995, Death Row Records signed Tupac. By February 1996, Snoop received complete exoneration from all allegations, prompting him to shift his focus towards crafting his second album. On July 6, 1995, Snoop Dogg founded a record label, Doggy Style Records Incorporated. By August 1996, Doggy Style Records, a subsidiary of Death Row Records, signed the Gap Band and Charlie Wilson as one of its first artists. Snoop Dogg collaborated with fellow rap artist Tupac Shakur on the 1996 single Two of America's Most Wanted. This was one of Shakur's last songs before he was shot on September 7, 1996, in Las Vegas, dying 6 days later. His second album, The Dogfather, was finally released in November 1996. Dr. Dre had left Death Row earlier in 1996 because of a contract dispute, so Snoop Dogg co-produced The Dogfather with Daz Dillinger and DJ Pooh. The album was greeted with mixed reviews, and it initially sold well but failed to produce hit songs as compared to his first album. The Dogfather had a somewhat softer approach to the G-Funk style. The death of Tupac, who had become a friend of Snoop's during 1996, and Dre leaving Death Row, leaving Suge Knight in charge, stalled sales of the Dogfather album. After Dr. Dre withdrew from Death Row Records to start his own label, Aftermath Records, Snoop realized that he was subject to an ironclad time-based contract where Death Row practically owned anything he produced for a number of years. Snoop refused to produce any more tracks for Suge Knight other than the insulting "Fuck Death Row" until his contract expired. He had been given lavish gifts by his former label, but they withheld his royalty payments. Snoop began to revamp his public image, moving away from his gangster roots toward a calmer lyrical aesthetic. He also began making gestures toward the rock community, signing up to tour with Lollapalooza 1997 and talking about 2 separate collaborations with Beck and Marilyn Manson. In March 1998, Snoop Dogg moved bass to join Master P's No Limit Records and turned against his old label boss in the process. This angered Suge Knight. A war of words between the 2 former affiliates followed, with Knight giving quotes to the media from prison. Snoop turned to dissing Knight on tracks such as Pimp Slapped, while Knight released Dead Man Walkin', a dubious compilation of Snoop's own unreleased Death Row material, the title of which was intended as an overt threat. Snoop says his friend the Bishop Don Magic Juan, the legendary Chicago pimp turned religious man, was crucial in keeping the beef from turning homicidal. However, Snoop Dogg and Suge Knight reconciled in 2005, following Unify the West, a Snoop-organized summit designed to squash beefs. In 1998, while Snoop was in Master P's No Limit crew, he acted in some straight-to-video flicks made by Master P and quickly realized acting was a good way to make money and something he wasn't bad at so long as he was playing characters close to his own life. Later in 1998, Snoop debuted on the No Limit Records label with "The Game is to be sold, not to be told." He said at the time that he was universal so he could fit into any camp, especially the camp that knows how to hand-make things. His other albums under No Limit Records were No Limit Top Dog in 1999 sold over 1.5 million copies, followed by The Last Meal in 2000 which sold over 2 million copies. The heavy album release schedule resulted in varying musical quality from album to album, but by the turn of the century, Snoop had become such a cultural phenomenon that his albums became almost secondary to the personality behind them. In 1999, his autobiography, The Dogfather, was published. In late 2002, Snoop released his first album for Capitol, Paid the Cost to be the Boss. He then switched to Geffen for 2004's RNG, Rhythm and Gangsta the Masterpiece. The hit album spawned Snoop's first #1 single, the Pharrell Williams-produced Drop It Like It's Hot, as well as the hit Signs with Justin Timberlake and Charlie Wilson. Rhythm and Gangsta was followed a year later by Welcome to the Church, the album, a collection of tracks from the Welcome to the Church mixtape series. That same year, he hosted a West Coast Peace Summit in hopes of squashing all beefs. Snoop met the Bishop Don Magic Juan the Pimp for more than 3 decades until he retired in 1985 in Chicago, and years later when they became friends, the Bishop led Snoop into the world of pimping and away from cripping. One of the more memorable and bizarre moments in Snoop's career came in 2003 when he walked the red carpet at the MTV Awards with 2 women on leashes who had looks of deference that suggested they were real prostitutes. Lots of rappers throw around the word pimp, but there's no way a top rapper would take up pimping as a hobby mid-career with a wife and 3 kids at home. In May 2004, Snoop filed for divorce and got further into the life that had been his childhood dream, but in late 2004, he said, some of the pimps told him to go back home to his wife. He later on reconciled with his wife and ended divorce proceedings, though it meant Snoop had to accept a different relationship. In the year 2000s, Snoop Dogg's career took an interesting turn as he ventured into various projects beyond music. He appeared in movies like Half-Baked and Training Day, showcasing his acting skills. He also dabbled in wrestling, guest hosting WWE events. These endeavors added to his multifaceted image. Since the start of his career, Snoop has been an avowed cannabis smoker, making it one of the trademarks of his image. In 2002, he announced he was giving up cannabis for good, but that did not last long, and in 2013, he claimed to be smoking approximately 80 cannabis blunts a day. In September 2006, Snoop was detained at John Wayne Airport in Orange County, California, by airport security after airport screeners found a collapsible police baton in his carry-on bag. His lawyer told deputies the baton was a prop for a musical sketch. Snoop was sentenced to 3 years probation and 160 hours of community service for the incident, starting in September 2007. In February 2022, a woman sued Snoop Dogg for $10 million, alleging that he sexually assaulted her in May 2013 following a concert in Anaheim, California. A source representing Snoop Dogg has denied the accusation. Snoop Dogg's early career was marked by his distinctive voice, laid-back style, and his pivotal role in shaping West Coast hip-hop. His journey from a young rapper discovered by Dr. Dre to a global icon reflected his ability to adapt, innovate, and remain relevant in an ever-changing industry.